This episode is brought to you by DistroKid. DistroKid is the easiest way for musicians to get their music into all the platforms: Amazon, Apple, Tidal, TikTok, YouTube, Spotify, and more. Plus, you've got unlimited uploads, and the artist keeps 100% of what they make. But what I love most about DistroKid is their app. The design of it just makes the whole process so easy. Now you can be sure that you're doing everything you need to do to get your music out there. Go to distrokid.com to check it out or download the app now. The very next day was Signe Tolley's wedding to the Matrix lighting technician, Jerry Anderson. And it was during the wedding, or at least after the wedding, where Skippy tripped on acid. So Signe, who did not partake, vividly recalled decades later how he was that night. And this, honestly, when I think about your book, I think about my image of her quote. So Signe recalled that Skip spent most of the night in a corner, babbling incoherently off in his own world, which to me is such a haunting image, because it's like only the day prior was his first live set with the Airplane, and he's already doing scary shit.
Yep.
Welcome to Discograffiti, the Music Obsessives podcast that gives freaks like you and me the chance to connect with a brotherhood obsessed with rating the entire discography of every single artist and band that ever mattered. I'm your host, Dave Gebrow, and with 4 new episodes each week, you're going to gain a comprehensive knowledge of an act's history and output in the time it takes to listen to one album. Each new guest swings a hard left into an area you either had no idea you needed to know about or know all about and can't believe you're not alone out there. And in this episode, we'll be turning our spray cans on Moby Grape, Skip Spence, along with our special guest, Moby Grape and Skip Spence biographer Cam Cobb. This episode is part of a series called Grape Expectations, a Rashomon-style overview of the band Moby Grape. Not only are they one of the all-time best, but there is no crazier story in the history of music than that of the Grape. It includes disastrous tours, lawsuits, police busts, horribly nefarious managers, a fake touring version of the band, mysterious black magic witches, drug-induced madness, insane asylums, and attempted murder with an axe. And no joke, that's just within the band's first 2 years. There will be separate interviews with all 3 living members of the band, Peter Lewis, Don Stevenson, and Bob Mosley, plus an epic interview with band biographer Cam Cobb on the great Skip Spence, and some surprise guests. The only way to hear the entirety of Grape Expectations is to visit patreon.com/discograffiti and subscribe at the major tier. If you don't want to subscribe, you can either click on the Collections tab and simply purchase the whole series, or even get them piecemeal. But the public episodes have been edited down for time, plus the Monday bonus episodes, which is half the series, aren't being aired publicly in full. So if you're a Grape fan, trust me, you'll want to get over to Patreon lickety-split. Here's just a few of the many things Cam and I discuss in part 1 of this podcast. Skip's wandering childhood, coming up in the South Bay folk scene with Billy Dean Andrus, his first little-known acid trip, the truth behind the wild legend of Skip passing through both Quicksilver and Jefferson Airplane in literally one afternoon, Skip's initial songwriting efforts, and his whirlwind 10-month tenure in Jefferson Airplane. Coming up, we've got an interview with Lenny Waronker, Denny Tedesco on his incredible new documentary, The Immediate Family, an unprecedentedly intimate interview with Marilyn Wilson Rutherford and her cousin and Honey's bandmate Ginger Blake, plus Season 3 of the Beach Boys and Your Dreams Come True series, which will absolutely, without question, delve deeper into Pet Sounds and Smile than anyone else ever has in history. Plus, Crosby and Nash's complete discography, discussed and rated by the man himself, Graham Nash. So don't miss out. Open up your listening app right now and subscribe. And away we go then. Today's guest wasn't on the internet back in the early 1990s. Instead, he used his copy of the second edition of the Rolling Stone Record Guide, the one with the blue cover. Sprinkled throughout those 12,000 plus album reviews were a select few 5-star rated albums, the cream of the crop. Most artists never reached that 5-star summit, but some of them did, if only once. And one of those bands was a mysterious group from San Francisco called Moby Grape. Intrigued by their bio, he tracked down their debut after a bit of an Odyssey-like search, and he was hooked the very second Hey Grandma kicked into gear. About 25 years later, he wrote a book about them called What's Big and Purple and Lives in the Ocean, the Moby Grape story, which I avidly read upon its release. And a few years after that, he wrote another book about their frontman called Weighted Down, The Complicated Life of Skip Spence. And as much as I love the Grape book, the Skippy book is on a whole other level. It took me on a roller coaster ride of emotion, and it absolutely stands as one of the better rock bios I've ever read. It was a thrilling and profound experience from beginning to end. He's written for a variety of magazines, including Record Collector, Shindig, and Ugly Things. He's written liner notes for a Skip Spence Record Store Day single, an album by Grape drummer Don Stevenson, and the recently released Found album by Skip Spence's pals band Weird Herald, about whom he's currently working on another book. You know a writer is dedicated when they insist on writing only about one band and one band only, and makes an exception only if they're close friends with that band. Our relationship over the past month or two has been a daily one, as we have mutually descended into the grape underworld together with childlike glee, our mutual admiration fueled by an inexhaustible hunger for and curiosity about the nucleus of this great group, the man himself, Alexander Lee Skip Spence. He is the guy to ask if you've got questions about Skip, and he's also as nice a fella as you could hope to meet. I'm proud to welcome to the sanctified halls of Discograffiti a man who's made one of the great bands of our time his life's work. A man whose overwhelming well-adjustedness constantly takes me by surprise when contrasted with the subjects of his fascination. Lads and ladies, here we go, down, down, down the Skip Spence rabbit hole with the only man whose hand I'd hold on such a journey. It's Cam Cobb.
Hello.
Dude, I really got it. I got to tell you straight up, I try to have a relationship with whoever's going to be on my show beforehand, but I don't think ever really had quite the luxury of getting to know, we've gotten to know each other to an extent, but really we're talking mainly about this band. But we are truly in touch with each other. And I can tell you from what I know about you thus far, this band is so blessed to have you. You love them so much, and you not only have written about them, but you continue to write about them in any fashion possible. Any kinds of articles that come down the pike, you're continually rewriting things that you have, training the microscope deeper on certain pockets of their career, and always looking to find different avenues and ways in which to express things about the same band over and over. And also, you're a teetotaler, in stark contrast to this famously imbibing band. You are as green as they come with substances, which means that you'll hit every deadline that would, of course, be skipped by with, wanton abandonment by the 5 original members of this group.
Yeah, I do miss deadlines on occasion, actually, but sometimes it's my indecisiveness that leads to that.
Well, you are honestly, from what I know about Canadians, in terms of the niceness that people talk about with Canadians, you're one of the nicest people I've ever met, and you're a pleasure to talk to about this stuff, and your passion for it is, I think what has us connected, because we just can't get enough of this, right?
For sure. It's funny how we were born in the same week, or within a couple of weeks, we discovered Grape around the same time. And that was like a really exciting time when Moby Grape was having a bit of a renaissance in a way, or being rediscovered. And then we both did things in our lives. And then we're back here at this moment, revisiting
What's your
Grape.
birthday again?
I'm Robert Burns Day, so January 25th, 72.
And I'm February 4th, 72. And
Wow.
there are stark similarities and stark differences between us. But, I've all but been stalking you. I think I've called you more than you've called me. But it's not like there's other people I have in my life who want to talk about Moby Grape 17 times a day.
Yeah, that's me too.
Yeah. So
For
thank
sure.
God we found each other. Even,
Yeah.
even Peter Lewis, Bob Mosley, and Don Stevenson don't want to talk about Moby Grape 17 times a day.
Yeah.
Actually,
For
especially
sure.
them. And speaking of those guys, one of the great things about this series, and this is the first episode of this incredible series called Grape Expectations, which is a 5-week series. And, you can have the entire thing, the whole thing is bundled on Patreon. It'll sort of be getting bigger as it goes as a collection on Patreon. If you're not a member of Patreon, you can go up there and get the whole kit and caboodle whilst not being a member, or you can actually subscribe at the major tier to get every last piece of what's coming down the pike. And it's a lot. So it's not only this amazing series with Cam that we're doing about Skip, but it's an interview with Bob Mosley that ran an hour, an interview with Peter Lewis that ran 4.5 hours, and an interview with Don Stevenson that lasted 6.5 hours, during which Cam participated in parts. And also there's going to be cameo appearances by some people, some of which I don't even know who's going to be coming on. But this whole thing is actually designed as a Rashomon-style game of perspective, because, for once, we're not having everyone in the same room corroborating on a story. It's almost like we're police officers getting people separately to look for splits in the story. We're going over the same ground, but with the guys, in separate areas, so we can get, their differences about how they see what happened. The Moby Grape story is, to me, and I'm guessing to you as well, Cam, the most interesting story in music history.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Absolutely.
There's massive discrepancies between what actually happened and how these guys sometimes remember it. And there's massive differences between how each of them remembers it as well. And we're going to stumble on that a great many times in the course of this series. It's one of my favorite things that I have ever done for Discograffiti. I've never done anything like it. And I didn't want to give short shrift to this series, because when I was in my early 20s, I was planning on doing a documentary about them and got in touch with them back then. And then when I was in my late 30s, I planned on writing a book about them called Grape Expectations, which, you thankfully beat me to it, because I wasn't meant to write the book. But this series is what I was meant to do. And the rolling out of this series is meant to dovetail with an event, a tribute to Jerry Miller of the band, who just passed away recently. It's actually a number of the guys, I don't know if all three, but at least a bunch of them are going to be there, amongst a whole slew of other people. It's June 22nd at 1 o'clock at the Phoenix Theater on Washington Street in Petaluma. And the acts that are confirmed are Moby Grape, Barry Melton from Country Joe and the Fish, Fuzzy Oxendine, and Terry Haggerty. Terry Haggerty is from Sons of Champlin, and Tieran Porter, formerly of the Doobie Brothers. It's probably going to be amazing. And the last show of this series is going to play on the date of that Petaluma gig. So without further ado, the nucleus of one of the greatest bands of all time, Moby Grape, is a man named Alexander Lee Skip Spence. So we are training the microscope down on a man who you captured so eloquently in your book, Weighted Down, The Complicated Life of Skip Spence. One of the great things about your book, one thing that you really attempted to do and succeeded with flying colors, is to really give the reader a sense of truly being there. I mean, before you zoom all the way in on a scene, you give a backstory of what's going on so you feel like you know the place and the people inside out. You can practically smell the air and, smell the patchouli, as it were, and, get a very, very strong sense and feeling of what's going on before any passage in the book even begins. Skip's childhood is where we start off. It's something I knew nothing about. Talk to me, about what you found out in doing your research for when Skip was a kid.
So when I started working on the book, the project came out of an experience where Omar, Skip's son, came to Toronto to play in a show with Don Stevenson, and Omar came and stayed at my place. And when we were talking at one point, Omar mentioned that he felt a little sad that there wasn't a book on his dad. And so that's when I got this idea, hey, I could do a book on Skip, and I can explore things that I didn't explore in the Moby Grape book, and I could approach the story in a different way. And so I pitched it to some different publishers and signed up with Omnibus in the summer of 2019. So this is 6 years ago, pre-COVID. And I decided to go in chronological order with my research. And so initially I got in touch with Skip's sister, Sherry. And so we're talking in the summer of 2019. I live in Toronto and I work in Windsor. And I was teaching a summer course in Windsor, which is Skip's hometown. So I'm walking by the place where he was born many times. I've done it hundreds of times over the years, and communicating with his sister. And at that same time, I'm diving into what was it like for the Spence family. And Skip's dad was performing in Windsor. His dad was a crooner, very talented musician. And so I was trying to walk the streets of Windsor and see what it was like in that town. The family owned a little grocery store, and tried to actually retrace what was the route that they would have taken home from the hospital when Skip was born. And Skip was a true baby boomer. He was born in April of 1946 on April 18th. And his dad was a war hero, actually, Jock. He was a bomber pilot, and he got a Distinguished Flying Cross, which only 4,000 folks in the RAF, the Canadian Royal Air Force, got. And that's 4,000 out of, I think there were over 200,000 in the Canadian Royal Air Force.
You know what really struck me is when I was reading your book early on, I was really suffused with sadness. Because, it's not like he had a rough family life. It seems like it was at least a loving family. But they moved around so much as a kid that he never really got to have his feet on the ground. I mean, thankfully, he had a loving dad and a loving mom. He had a musician dad, who unfortunately could never hold down a secure gig long enough to get any stability for the family. But it was a tight family, and they moved all around for a long time. And unfortunately, once they actually, threw anchor in San Jose, California, that's basically when his parents split. So it's like all of that uphill climb, all of the all for one, one for all thing while they're traveling. It's like it didn't even mean anything. They get to San Jose and mom and dad split almost immediately, right?
Yeah. So I think that when a kid moves around a lot, when they become older, it can lead to them continuing to move around a lot and really not having roots, or it could lead somebody to really wanting roots. And so with Skip's sister, she's been in Spokane for a very long time, and she has strong roots there. And so she took that kind of path. And for Skip, though, he was constantly on the go.
Another thing that's very much worth mentioning, it's sort of the crux of the Skip Spence story and the Moby Grape story, is Skip, from when he gets to San Jose and when he starts playing music, around 1964 to 1967, lives what can only be called a charmed life. Everything he puts his hand to is successful in one way or another, sometimes so unbelievably so that it's jaw-dropping. And then it's almost like at the drop of a hat, all of a sudden, in June 1967, when it seems like the rest of the world starts living a charmed life, his goes down the drain. And it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And it's like that manic depression thing, the external charmed nature of his life and his luck is so crazily bountiful. And then it's so much in the opposite direction that it's almost hard to believe.
Absolutely.
Talk to me about crossing paths with Billy Dean Andrus.
Right. So Skip was transplanted, right? He came to California by way of Windsor, Detroit, Ohio, Phoenix, and then his family moved around the San Jose area a little bit. They were in Walnut Creek and Hayward. And arriving in high school, this guy had traveled a lot, and he had traveled from far away with his family. Billy Dean is actually the same. Billy Dean's family came from Minnesota to California. And I wonder if the two of them forming a friendship and bonding in high school is partly because they were both in a way kind of outsiders in California, where it was not where they grew up. And yet here they are in high school together, and they're both really artistic and passionate about music. And they dive into folk music together. And this is a time where folk is having a kind of revival, and folk is more connected to the beat movement. And so you have these two guys who dive into folk music together. Billy Dean's family's house was a kind of place where people gathered and hung out. And so they would hang out at Billy Dean's, as would other people. But Skip and Billy Dean formed this real close bond, and they would perform together, sometimes as the Andrews Brothers.
And that's crucial to know. It seems crucial to know because Skip is a formidable personality, and he took on Billy Dean's last name, just to give you some kind of clue as to the talent and, formidable nature of Billy Dean himself. Who honestly, as of a few months ago, was really the first time I'd even heard of him. And I can't believe that it really was the first time, because the more you get to know what Billy Dean touched, the more you realize that this guy was, although not around very long, he wound up having an effect on a lot of things that became super huge. Skip and Billy Dean, they played folk clubs in and around the South Bay, sometimes as a duo, like you said, sometimes as a trio, and sometimes solo as well. And unfortunately, there's no recordings that exist of these guys playing. And just to paint a little bit of a picture of the South Bay folk scene, it's kind of exciting at the time because you have Janis Joplin there, David Freiberg, Jorma Kaukonen, Paul Kantner, Herb Peterson. There's a lot of future superstars hanging around doing their seminal thing at that time.
Absolutely. And Skip and Billy Dean are just rookies at that time. They're starting to write and they're starting to perform. So they're getting their feet wet as songwriters and also as performers.
Yeah, also, it's worth knowing Skip had loads of responsibilities that a lot of folkies at that time did not have. At 18 years old, in August 1964, Skip was married to his wife, Pat.
They were married in March, but in August is when they had their first kid.
So he's working at a furniture store and, wanting to be, a folk artist, and kind of becomes one of the first ever singer-songwriters at that time. And It's amazing because it's this whole side of his career that before I read the book, I had zero idea about. That he was this guy with all these responsibilities, and he was hitting all of his responsibilities. He was actually getting up, going to work, going to the club, being a dad, being a husband. There was that part of his life where he was able to check all those boxes and be present. And then one major thing that you uncovered in your 5 years of research for the book, because this was, I believe, undocumented for quite a long time and was known to have happened later. But somewhere in late 64 to early 65, Skip tries LSD for the first time in a grassy area near San Jose State. The trip itself goes well. It's a very serene afternoon that he has without any noticeable downside for the time being. But it's amazing to me that Skip is doing acid as early as late 1964. I believe that precedes the Beatles. I could be wrong about that, but I think it does. Oh, hi, I'm Dave Gebrow. I threw my career as a licensed hearing instrument specialist in the trash, sold my house, and moved to the East Coast with my wife and 5-year-old son in order to focus on making the ultimate weekly podcast for music obsessives thrive. But weekly wasn't enough for me, so I bumped it up to 4 shows a week. Becoming a subscriber to Discograffiti's Patreon gives you access to hundreds of exclusive episodes. As a 2-show per week private, you get the weekly show by and for our Patreon family, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast. As a 3-show-a-week lieutenant, you'll get early release, ad-free, extended director's cuts of the main show. They're the shows as they were intended to be heard. Plus, you'll gain access to half the Patreon archive and the upcoming Beach Boys Behind the Mirror companion episodes, which will feature dozens of special guests from within the Beach Boys camp talking about and rating their music. But as a 4-show-per-week major, you'll be drowning in a flood of must-hear binge listening, because I'll be bombarding you with episodes about super cool bands that are too subterranean for free Fridays. It's like going to music college, but with a tuition that makes all kinds of sense. Plus, our entire Patreon archive is yours. Discograffiti's Top 10, our Buried Treasure show, Rock Cousteau, our Slag Off show, Queasy Listening, and the Private Press with Paul Major. And all that for the price of only a cup of coffee a week. Times are tough, you say? Fret not, because there's a $1 tier. Or you could just join as a basic member and buy episodes piecemeal from our Patreon shop. Don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not giving. Check out patreon.com/discograffiti to find the tier that's right for you. Once again, that's patreon.com/discograffiti. You know, this first trip goes by without incident, and then a few months after that, May 1st, 1965, very suddenly out of nowhere, his dad, Jock, dies of a heart attack at the age of 50. You know, it's unsurprising that all these events start dovetailing quickly. His dad passes away, and then it's like all of a sudden things speed up to a blur, really, because you know, what you have around his dad's death is 2 months prior, Bring It All Back Home comes out. Then 1 month prior to Jock passing away, Mr. Tambourine Man comes out. Then 2 months after his dad passes, Dylan Plays Newport. And basically what that equals is folk becoming rock overnight for Skip. All of that stuff with his dad dying, I don't know if it has something directly to do with it, but the musical aspect of it certainly does. And within 2 weeks to a month, everyone was buying electric guitars and starting bands. At this point, it's worth knowing that Skip is expecting their second child. He and Pat were pregnant.
That's right. So Adam, who will be born in January of 66. And so folkies in mid-65, around that time, with Dylan going electric, some purists will say, like, this is heresy, this is terrible, how can this happen? But then there are some folkies who, like you said, like are just embracing it. Skip forms a band called The Mains.
Well, first, he quits the furniture store job. His wife, Pat, moves back in with her mom, and Skip splits, you know, at least geographically, with his family. He heads to Tahoe. So now he's got a wife, a second kid on the way, living with her mom, and he's gone. And so during the summer of 65, Skip forms this band.
Yeah, and I think he had a couple different iterations of The Mains, and so it was kind of temporary.
You know what's wild to me, though, is that he leaves his wife and his soon-to-be 2 kids and goes off as if to make it. But really, when you get down to it, The Mains was just a cover band. They played Stones, Beatles, Byrds covers, no original material. And it was really just a blip.
It shows a few things. It shows his readiness to drop everything and relocate on the spur of the moment, right? So that's the spontaneity. He's going to change direction several times in his life, and he's always ready to do that.
I wonder what his conversation was like with Pat when he sat her down and said, you know, I got to leave the state because I have an amazing opportunity with a cover band. I mean, until the inevitable happens, she seems unbelievably understanding to a degree that I honestly can't imagine.
This is, I guess, another thing is this is 60 years ago. So it's such a different time back then.
Right. So before he actually gets to San Francisco, there's one final pit stop, and it's Skip partnering back up again with Billy Dean Andrus for a very brief foray back into folk, just for one last time. Then Billy Dean exits the story for a little while, but he's going to come back into things a little bit later on. Skip is invited into a band called the Topsiders, And the Topsiders drove down to the shelter to hear him play one night and invited Skip into the band right on the spot. He had a couple of rehearsals with them, and he actually offered the possibility to them of changing the name of the band to The Other Side, with the caveat that another group in San Francisco might want to use it and that he might actually need to go play with them if they wanted him. And of course, that other band wound up calling themselves the Jefferson Airplane, and they did want Skip.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things happening, some things overlapping. So Skip being in the mains, he's going back and forth to Tahoe and playing with different musicians. Skip doing folk music with Billy Dean. I think it was like a continuous thing, but not always consistent. So him going back with Billy Dean, and then there's that newspaper article with a photo of them.
What length of time are they back together for? It seems like it's so brief.
I'm actually not sure, but the interesting thing is like it happened around August of 65. And that's the moment that the very first iteration of Jefferson Airplane is taking form. And so in July, August of 65, you got Skip going back and forth to Tahoe, performing with the mains, with different musicians. It's kind of like a pickup band. And then you have Skip still doing some folk music with Billy Dean in the folk clubs. He gets this offer to join the Topsiders, and Jefferson Airplane, meanwhile, up in San Francisco, forms.
This story, by the way, the whole essence of Skip, and really how you start perceiving the man himself in your book, it begins with, what is myth and what is true. And there's such an astounding panoply of legends and mythologies about Skip. Him wearing pajamas and riding a motorcycle down to Nashville when he gets out of Bellevue, being in an early version of Quicksilver. But you actually lay all this stuff out in a way that, honestly, when I was reading that part about Quicksilver in your book, my heart was pounding because I was like, finally, for decades, I've been reading these vague stories. And here's this guy who finally, after years of digging, has come out with the actual story of what happened. It was so exciting for me to actually get that as information.
Yeah,
it really was. I mean, that was amazing. And August and September of 65 is where things pick up and get so fast. Just for history's sake, the Topsiders, I believe he only had, was it one show with them? I think it was only one. Yeah. In early September 65, he played one show with the band that he renamed The Other Side. Is there a recording of that?
No, not that I know of.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, one day in early September, this is one of the great stories in music history as far as I'm concerned, because it sounds like it's not real. And somehow yet this is real. So one day in early September 65, Skip Spence is sitting in a Sausalito park playing his acoustic guitar, and here comes three guys walking by on their way to rehearsal. It's John Cipollina and Jimmy Murray, along with David Freiberg. They've all got guitars. I think David had his bass. And soon those three guys would become 3/5 of Quicksilver Messenger Service. They weren't yet the band. So someone starts talking to someone, and the three of them invite Skip to rehearse with them at the Matrix, of all places, which had just opened a few weeks earlier. So Spence, Cipollina, Murray, and Freiberg, they go to the Matrix. They run through a few numbers with Casey Sonnabend on congas and percussion. What you had assumed in the book is that it's done in an early Quicksilver kind of style, likely a kind of rugged, bluesy take on folk. And as this legendary one-time only quintet performs, Skip's exuberance and way of being catches Marty Ballin's attention. Marty, of course, is the owner of the Matrix and was putting a group together that would become Jefferson Airplane. The intended idea was that it would be the house band of the Matrix. So as Marty later said, I just saw him and said, "Hey man, you're my drummer." And Skip said, "No, I'm a guitar player." I handed him some sticks and said, "Go home and practice and I'll call you in a week." And Skip said, "Well, I'll give it a try." And he was great. So Skip said, I learned drums because I wanted to get in a band. I wanted to be famous. Now, here's where I'll shut up because, I want you to just pick through all that and let's milk this leg of the story because it is so crazy what happens in that, what is it, 1 or 2 hours of time? It's crazy. And then also over the course of that next week, somehow magically, Skip trying his hand at an instrument that he had had no practice with whatsoever becomes not just a proficient drummer, but a great drummer.
And you can hear it on the outtakes, certainly you can hear some really interesting things he's doing percussion. But we have a few things here. We have Skip in a park hanging out, bumps into these other people. There's like a lot of luck there for those people to be there at that time and to bump into each other. But then we also have, they're charmed by Skip. Skip is like a completely charming person. The Levin brothers were charmed by him. When Billy Dean bumps into Skip again after not seeing him for a while, Skip runs over to him and hugs him. When Skip first meets guys in Moby Grape, he's hugging people, welcoming them to the promised land. This is a really affable, charming, exciting person. So I can totally see how the people would be swept away, and he swept away with them to go to this rehearsal at the Matrix. The Matrix is just embryonic, like just forming at that time. Marty Balin is one of the owners of this club, and he's starting up this band, but they need a new drummer. And so Skip, again, he's right there at the right place at the right time, but he doesn't play the drums. But again, another thing with Skip's personality, he's just open to trying different things.
But he's like a magical person. I mean, who becomes a great drummer in a week?
Yeah.
Probably Gene Krupa wasn't a great drummer in a week. It almost doesn't make sense. And from when Skip starts talking with the Quicksilver guys in the park in Sausalito to when Marty hands them the drumsticks, it's got to be, like 2 hours? And in that stretch of time, they have ceased to be human beings. They are now pawns moving through history, creating history in only 2 hours. It's just wild to think about. And the craziest thing to me, as somebody just discussing this stuff, is I bet none of those guys had any inkling that they were making history. They were just living their life.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then to think just a few weeks later, he's interacting with Phil Spector, auditioning for Phil Spector down in LA.
And he probably thought nothing of that too. I mean,
Yeah.
Skip probably didn't ruminate on any of this stuff until far, far later.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. And by the way, if you're intrigued, whether you're a Skip fan or not, this book is replete with stories like that are just incredible. The depth of detail that you use, Cam, to set these things up in the course of the book is truly amazing. As soon as I finished reading it, I wanted to start all over again and just let it wash over me. It was so incredible, all the detail. So, the next momentous event is in August of 1965, and it probably didn't seem momentous at the time. The guys, like you had said, they were taken to Los Angeles to audition for a few labels. And the Airplane's manager, a guy named Matthew Cates, who of course figures in this story in a big way, takes them down and gets them a room at the Palms, which is a secluded lodge in the Hollywood Hills. And Bob Harvey and Skip get a room together. Tell me what happens that night in the room.
Well, there was songwriting, and there was a song called Hurting for People that Bob Harvey later recorded. Skip never went back to it. Yeah. And the thing with the songwriting at that time is that I can't remember which, but one of the Levin brothers was telling me that Skip was really not proprietorial at all about his writing. And so he would give stuff away.
Oh, by the way, just to clarify, Bob Harvey is an early member of the Jefferson Airplane who was replaced before the recordings occur. So Bob, much later in the year 2004, Bob Harvey had a group called San Francisco Blue, and you could hear the result of the song that they wrote, Hurting for People. And actually, to write that song, I believe Skip went a few doors down to Paul Kantner's room and asked to borrow his guitar because I don't think he had a guitar on him. And, they smoked a joint and wrote this song, which is actually really solid. It's a solid song that sounds like an old folk standard, actually.
Mm-hmm. And so Skip would do these things, I think, on the spur of the moment, and he wouldn't really think about the future. And so, he's credited, of course, as the songwriter, but I wonder if there's other songs out there in his folk days that could have reemerged later on, and maybe they got lost in time. But I think this happened a lot with Skip, where he would do something. He's very spontaneous in the moment, create something, and he's very intuitively creative, of course. And he just co-creates this thing. And the person, of course, is really moved by it and revisits it. The people around Skip were moved by their experiences with Skip. And that really struck me.
If you're looking to compile or at least get an overview of everything that Skip did, or wrote, I should say, or played on, Hurting for People is really not bad at all for a quick impromptu jobby at a motel with a soon-to-be ejected member of the Airplane on a borrowed guitar after a few tokes.
Absolutely.
It's where we begin in terms of Skip's writing. And so the Jefferson Airplane's live debut was on Friday, August 13th, 1965. And just a few weeks after that, Marty Bowen was looking for a replacement for the drummer, Jerry Peliquin. Am I pronouncing that right? Peliquin?
I think so.
Okay. And then September 17th, 65 was Skip's first live set with the Airplane. He was 19 years old. And around then was when Skip met their manager, Matthew Cates. So I guess when he was put up at the Palms, he had not yet met Matthew. But that next month was the first time that Skip crossed paths with Matthew Cates, who would, of course, impact his life to a great extent. So the next day, after playing his first live set ever with the Airplane, the very next day was Signe Tolley's wedding to the Matrix lighting technician, Jerry Anderson. And it was during the wedding, or at least after the wedding, where Skippy tripped on acid. Was this his second trip experience? Or...
No, I don't think so. He would have had more between then for sure. Yeah.
Okay. So Signe, who did not partake, vividly recalled decades later how he was that night. And this, honestly, when I think about your book, I think about my image of her quote. So Signe recalled that Skip spent most of the night in a corner, babbling incoherently off in his own world, which to me is such a haunting image, because it's like only the day prior was his first live set with the Airplane, and he's already doing scary shit.
Yep, absolutely.
September 20th, 2 days later, Jefferson Airplane auditions for Phil Spector in LA. This is just weeks after he joined the band. And, even though the audition was 5 songs, there is one demo that was released that you can find on YouTube, and that's a version of The Other Side of This Life. In late October, Jack Cassidy replaces Bob Harvey on bass. Bob is now out. And I love how you do this in the book, by the way. You just kind of stop and take stock of all of the stuff that's happened in such a short time. Because God knows, Skip didn't do that. So in just a few months, Skip had shifted from the Topsiders to the Mains, to performing as half of a duo, to a short-lived rehearsal band, to 2 different versions of the Jefferson Airplane. He'd also switched from guitar and vocals to drums, and his wife, Pat, was just a few months away from having their second child. This episode is brought to you in part by Bespoke LA. Located in the Fairfax district of Los Angeles, Bespoke LA is the modern podcaster's dream come true. It's got 2 podcast pods available, one with audio only and the other with both audio and video. Just think, you can start your own podcast tomorrow without investing a single penny in equipment. What, you don't have experience editing? Don't even sweat it. For an additional fee, Bespoke LA can edit your podcast. Or not, it's entirely up to you. Rates start at $75 an hour with discounts if you book 4 sessions at once. Go to bespokela.com/podcast. That's BSPOKELA.com/podcast for more information or to book your time today. And be sure to tell them that Dave sent you for a one-time 25% discount. Jefferson Airplane started recording their debut LP, and that's December 16th, 1965. And it's for 3 days. So the 16th, 17th, 18th. And behind the boards is Matthew Cates and his friend Tommy Oliver. They produced 14 tracks over 3 days, which is, of course, a very short amount of time for that kind of material. And those were all set aside. Only It's No Secret would be used on the debut, right?
Yeah, and some big things here. So we have the first rock show at the Fillmore. And again, Skip's at the right place at the right time. And this is pivotal. It's Bill Graham going into rock music promotion and absolutely changing the game. Because before that, we have people playing in places like bowling alleys, top-notch bands performing in bowling alleys.
And pizza parlors, like the Dead.
Yeah.
Some of their earliest shows were at pizza parlors.
Yeah. And so there wasn't really that vision that Graham brought to the table where you have this kind of experience that's supposed to be like, I don't know, like almost like a hallowed experience where you're in this hall and you have a light show and you have quality sound.
Immersive.
And so absolutely. And so Skip is right there at ground zero for these rock shows, which happens in late 65, playing with the Airplane. And Graham, of course, was managing the San Francisco Mime Troupe, which is an activist kind of organization. And they were, this is like reflective of Skip's folk scene where they're like doing activism as well as art at the same time. And Graham is organizing these benefits because they're getting into trouble with the law. They're trying to push censorship laws with their performances. And so Graham drops out of theater. And Graham had also pursued an acting career before that and could have had an acting career. Thank goodness for like rock music that it didn't work out for him. He almost, though, got into acting fully. So anyway, he starts now mapping out this new career path, renting out these ballrooms, starting out with just one, of course, to see what it's going to be like. He has no idea it's going to be successful in San Francisco. And so Skip's right there. Skip is also there like when the Airplane start recording that first album in mid-December of 65. The Stones have just walked out of that studio. They did a little bit of recording for a few days before the Airplane walked in there. And for Skip, this is very exciting too, because Skip loves the Stones.
And then importantly, starting on February 19th, the Jefferson Airplane go back to do sessions for their debut record, Jefferson Airplane Takes Off. It begins February 19th. They stop on the 28th and then start up again March 15th and end on the 21st. There's somewhere around 11 tracks recorded. February 28th is an important day because the first song ever written by Skip that was recorded in a studio goes down that day. It's Skip co-written with Marty Balin. Don't Slip Away by the Airplane happens during work on Jefferson Airplane's debut. And then that next month, another co-write by Balin and Spence was recorded, Blues from an Airplane, which, of course, is the first song on the first Jefferson Airplane record. So Skip actually has a pretty profound imprint on the Airplane. He wasn't just a shadowy figure in the background. He co-wrote the very first song that they ever released, which is kind of amazing. It's a great song. Also for the Airplane, there's an outtake co-written with Balin called It's All Right, and a personal favorite of mine, which I can't believe isn't talked about more, JPP McStep B Blues, which is written solely by Skip and includes Jerry Garcia on guitar. Why is that song not considered a classic? It was just junked on the album Early Flight. And to me, that's as good as any of the songs on the first two albums.
Yeah, a part of the Airplane would be complications associated with their ongoing lawsuits with Matthew Cates, and maybe stuff could have gotten different kind of attention if they weren't involved in these lawsuits that only got resolved in the mid to late 1980s. And so, having that Early Flight album come out, I think it came out in 74.
Yeah.
So we're talking 8 years after it's recorded. All
right. So now we reach a pivot point. So end of April or beginning of May 1966, Skip takes off on and here again is where legend rears its ugly head and mythology takes over because there's like such a vague, liminal sort of anything goes nature to the stories told about this incident. But end of April, beginning of May 66, Skip takes off on an extended vacation to Mexico with a 16-year-old girl named Martha Wax, and doesn't bother to tell his bandmates. The song Martha on the amazing record After Bathing at Baxter's by Jefferson Airplane was eventually written about her. And then this vacation wound up costing Skip his gig because he either missed a gig that the Airplane had or a rehearsal or a few rehearsals. But whatever it was, he was promptly fired from the band. And I'm guessing, as I think you are from how you lay it out in the book, that this was a decision made so he could be fired from the band.
Yeah, I think that, Skip wanted to be a front man, and Balin had talked about that in subsequent interviews. And there's an interview with Skip and Bob Mosley that was in early November of 67, where that gets mentioned about Skip having a kind of disagreement with Marty Balin.
When journalist Peggy King asked Skip why he left the airplane, Spence answered, "I wanted to get back to guitar." At which point Bob Mosley added, "And wasn't Marty always giving you this, thing?" To which Skip replied, yeah. So it's like this friction element that's kind of swept under the carpet. And that's literally as in-depth as it's ever publicly gone into, right?
Right. And Balin had subsequently mentioned in interviews that Skip wanted to be a front man, which is completely true, I think. And so Skip, even if he was unconscious of doing that, he's ready to move on. And again, this is something that Skip grew up as a kid, moving from one place to another. And musically, he's reproducing this. He's just hopping from one experience to another. And it's all working out. So he's not really, I think, worried. I think I mentioned in the book, like Skip is carefree and careless, but not uncaring. And so this is another example of that, where Skip is just not even worried about what's going to happen.
At almost the exact same time, Signe Tolley Anderson now gave birth to her daughter Lilith, and she was in the process of leaving the band as well. So the band plays a 6-night run of shows at the Matrix and sharing the bill during that run. And here's where, history is just too beautifully dovetailing. It's like history writes itself. They share the bill during that run with the Great Society, which was fronted by a vocalist named Grace Slick. And right at that time, Marty Balin begins growing extremely wary and distrustful of Matthew Cates. And this is right at the time when Cates brought Spence Dryden into the band. And this is hysterical. I didn't know this, but Dryden's first gig with the Jefferson Airplane was June 6th. And very oddly, it was at a private event for the Republican Alliance. Talk about a gig that does absolutely nothing for a manager's standing in your band.
Absolutely. And it isn't acrimonious in that Skip is not going to stick around and help bring in the new drummer and get the new drummer, get his feet on the ground. And Spencer Dryden becomes a friend of Skip. Spencer Dryden goes to his memorial later on when Skip passed away, much later on. And so Skip stays with them long enough to bring in the new drummer.
Can I tell you, my favorite thing about Spencer Dryden is that, man, this guy knew the right time to leave a band. I mean, Altamont happened, and I don't know specifically why he chose to leave, but he left right after Altamont, and that band went sharply downhill in 1970. I mean, like a sharp decline. But anyway, it's right around that time when Skip and Matthew Cates hatch a plan to form a band together. And it's at this point where we're going to bid you adieu, and we'll see you next week, because here's where the other characters in the story start coming into play. And next week, we're going to have Peter Lewis and Don Stevenson talk to us about what it was like to be recruited into this absolute madness, this 3-ring circus that's about to take shape around Skip Spence. All right, that about does it. Stay tuned, because next week brings upon us a brand new epic episode in the Grape Expectations series. This one's a doubleheader interview. First Don Stevenson and then Peter Lewis. That's right, in one episode. I'm spoiling you guys. Okay, here's the week up ahead. This Sunday, our weekly show within a show, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast, drops for our Patreon's private tier. These are real people with talent and a burning fire deep inside, just like you and I. Then come Monday, the major tier gets a very special treat. And man, do I mean special. Monday's bonus episode is a very special interview with the great Bob Mosley, the soul-belting wonderkind from Moby Grape. So don't miss it, as this will be his only appearance on Grape Expectations. There will be a very short sneak peek running publicly for free on Monday morning, but the entirety of the show will only be accessible on the major tier of our Patreon. Don't miss it, or you'll only be getting part of the story. And then on Wednesday, the Lieutenant tier gets their early release, ad-free, super extended director's cut of the Don Stevenson and Peter Lewis doubleheader podcast. It's the episode as it was truly intended to be heard, with all the essentials left intact. And then come Friday, everyone else gets to join in on the action. A heartfelt Discograffiti thanks goes out to my beautiful wife and son, Jen and Mason, Cam Cobb, Rudy Fishman, Becky Boyd, Jay Schultz, Bespoke LA, my mom, my dad, my incredibly loyal fans, and especially the entire Patreon community, the Soldiers of Sound. I love every last one of you, and this show would not exist without you, my friends. Speaking of friends, it's high time for some new ones. They're in our Facebook group, Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound. That's the best way to find out what's coming up on the show, but there's a hell of a lot more. You get recaps of the day in music history, the ability to pitch questions to guests, polls that put you in the driver's seat on guest and band decisions, access to a thriving creative hub if you're looking for a collaborator, and much, much more. So make sure you don't miss out. You can find the link to the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound Facebook page right there in the show notes. And if you don't mess with the Zuck, no sweat. Just email me at info@discograffiti.com and I'll keep you in the loop. So now that it's done and you want more, another way to dive even deeper into the classic rock and roll from the 1960s is to go to the Beach Boys Season 1, Catch a Wave, 1961 to 1964, from episode 189 on, the Righteous Brothers Bill Medley interview, that's 181 and 182, my interview with the Free Design, that's 160 to 162, my epic interview with the Mamas and Papas Michelle Phillips, that's 141 to 159, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, that's 137, my 12-hour interview with Terry Kirkman and Jules Alexander from the Association, that's 109 to 113, Vashti Bunyan reading her entire output, that's 103 to 104, Sergio Diaz from Os Mutantes, that's 86 and 87, Bert Summer, that's 83 and 84, Sweetwater is episode 79, a tribute to David Crosby, 77 and 78, Andrew Tuttle rates the Monks, 74, Jim Florentine on Black Sabbath is 64 to 68, Lou Barlow on the Zombies is 59 and 60, Marvin Gaye biographer David Ritz rates Marvin Gaye, that's 45 to 47, Blind Faith is 43, Anthony Fantano rates the Velvet Underground is 32 and 33, Bob Forrest rates the band is 25 and 27, Monkees manager Andrew Sandoval rates the Monkees, that's 22 and 23, Don Randy rates David Axelrod is 17, Badfinger is 16, The Bee Gees is 10 and 11, Sly and the Family Stone is 5, 6, and 7, and Pink Floyd is 1 and 2. And of course, be sure to mark your calendars, because next Friday, May 29th, we're coming at you with the next installment of Grape Expectations, the Don Stevenson and Peter Lewis doubleheader podcast. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss it. And so, from now till then, don't let our youth go to waste, lads and ladies. It's Discograffiti!